And so in my work, when I work with all these organizations, this idea of sustainability, as you know, I'm sure, is rather hard to get your hands around because it includes everything. There's nothing that's off the table in sustainability. The food we eat, how we get around, how we use resources, how we build things, how we relate to each other and manage things, how we govern ourselves. Everything's on the table with sustainability because it's about everything. It's about real impacts. And because of that, organizations get a little flustered. They want to actually do something. And so, rightly so, they focus in on something they understand. And it tends to look like, you know, in my world, in development and in city government, it tends to look like getting more efficient fleet vehicles for a city. Or it tends to look like replacing light bulbs in a building and conserving. And so Norman brought up this idea of conservation. And what I want to talk about today is how to make conservation effective and how not to misuse it and misunderstand the idea that conservation itself is the goal. So we somehow got the idea that incandescent light bulbs and sport utility vehicles are a big problem. We somehow connected the fact that they're really inefficient with the outcome of their pollution. And that's sort of true. But there's a lot more to it than that. And it has a lot to do with behavior and social systems and all of these other possibilities. And when we narrow the question just down to efficiency, we miss out on so many opportunities. So I want to show you something because I think this is, let's see if I can get this. All right. So in 1950, we started increasing the amount of electricity we use per person in California. And it really started shooting up from the mid-60s into the late 70s. And then something happened. In California, we got the first energy regulation in the country. We started to regulate building energy efficiency. So we regulated that you had to have insulation and use efficient windows, and you had to have an efficient heater and air conditioner and so on. And that amount of electricity per person started to level off. And that was this enormous success. The whole rest of the country, the amount of electricity per person kept on increasing. But still, you know, we still use 3 times today what we did back then. And so also, over that same time period, the population was going up. The population was steadily rising. It was a little over 10 million on the right-hand side there, that brown line. And today it's about 37 million. And so the population went up about 3.5 times during that time period. And so if we really want to look at total impacts, though, we don't look at energy per person. We look at energy. We look at total emissions. So to get to energy, you multiply those curves. And you get about a 10 times increase, roughly, in electricity in the state since 1950. And it turns out that the carbon content of our energy hasn't changed a lot. So this is a really good measure of how much carbon we're releasing, and it's also a really good measure of cost. We're spending about 10 times more, and we're emitting about 10 times more. So this happened over the same time period that refrigerators got 85% more efficient. And light bulbs today use 1/7 of the electricity that they did in 1950 to release the same amount of light. So we had our eye on the wrong ball. Efficiency is really important. It's a tool. And conservation itself is essential for getting somewhere, but it's not the goal. The goal is something else. So I want to ask this question, who cares, right? Because efficiency is still good. So why do we care, right? And I want to tell you about a trap that I see people getting into. And I've gotten there myself many times. And that is that we imagine that we are conserving relative to some hypothetical scenario that we imagine is even worse. So we say, okay, we're going to build a new housing development, and we're going to make sure that the homes use 50% less energy than the statewide average. Isn't that amazing? But that means that the amount of fossil fuels burned in the state goes up. If we don't do anything about the way the traffic is handled there, the traffic goes up, the emissions from that go up, the costs of that go up, the policy implications are heading in the wrong direction. We're still not being part of a solution. we're doing less harm. And less harm is not the same as some good. And that trap in thinking has got us stuck. So I want to turn that around a little bit. Think of it this way. Increasing the amount of fossil energy, and I'm just using energy as an idea here. We can talk about water, we can talk about wood, we can talk about fish. This is true about everything, right? So the idea that increasing the amount of fossil fuel we use, no matter how efficiently, that's a problem. No matter how efficiently. Increasing the amount of water we use in a water-constrained Western United States is a problem, even if we use 90% less than the average for some new use, right? Okay, so keep your eye on that ball. So what do we regulate? We regulate the energy use per square foot in buildings. We regulate miles per gallon on cars. These are efficiency metrics. So what do we get? We get more efficient windows. We get more efficient light bulbs. We get higher mileage cars. We don't get thinking about how people get to work. We don't get thinking about changing hot desking systems where you can work from home or nearby home. We don't get thinking about changing the way kids get to school so you don't have every parent driving every child twice a day to school. That's not part of the solution because our eye's on miles per gallon. So this comes up in policy, it comes up in governance, it comes up in corporations, it comes up in organizations all the time. The idea that we miss the idea that efficiency, we think efficiency is the goal. So what if we focus on real impacts? What do we get? What kind of new opportunities emerge out of this? And in my world, I do a lot of development work, and we get a lot of surprises when we start asking this bigger picture question. So we get surprises like we discover that we have, that it's more important where we build a home than how we build it. So if you build a really inefficient single-family home that's leaky and doesn't have anything going for it on energy, and you build it right downtown, it's across the street from a park, and it's near some restaurants, it's near daycare, you can walk to the grocery store, that home has far less impact than the LEED Platinum condo outside of town. Far less impact, okay? So where we build matters more than what we build. That's interesting, right? That should actually be reflected in our policy, and it's not. By and large, it's not. Sonoma County is beginning to play with these things, though, and that's where it gets really interesting. We also learn, here's a surprise, strong communities where people feel safe use less energy. Why is that? People spend more time outside. When you're outside, you use less energy. Okay? People feel safe enough to get on a bus with strangers. Oh. Imagine if it was so safe that kids started walking to school again, right? Then we'd be somewhere. So, safety, a sense of safety, public safety as an energy policy, right? This is where lateral thinking gets exciting, right? The question is bigger. We're asking a more interesting question. What can we do to deal with the real impacts, the absolute impacts that we care about? So imagine if we start tracking for those impacts. You know, a test for a new development would be whether it actually reduces the state of California's total traffic emissions and whether it reduces Sonoma County's water use. That could be the test for a new development. Do we want to say yes or no to this development? And this sounds impossible, right? This sounds like, that's impossible. How could building new houses or an office building or whatever, how could that actually reduce traffic in California? It's actually not even impossible, it's easy. It just radically transforms what we build. But it's really easy. If you put a grocery store in a neighborhood that needs a grocery store, it doesn't have one now, it reduces regional traffic. Now imagine if the planning department said, not only are we going to let you build a grocery store, we're going to work with you so that you get a permit in 3 months if you're a developer and you have a contract to operate it for 10 years. Imagine that. 3 months, you have a permit. Come here, build a grocery store because we need it. That's a new world. That's a new paradigm of thinking about a solution. You also have opportunities like harvesting water rights. You know, you can build on a parking lot that has no historical water use, and you can add water use to that site and still reduce Sonoma County's water consumption if you find the high school next door. And you go and you convert all their water, their urinals and toilets, and convert their irrigation to use reclaimed water. You're using efficiency as a tool. You're harvesting those water rights. You're bringing them over to your new site and building your office building. You're having a net positive impact on real impacts, not hypothetical scenarios that are way off in some imaginary land, but real world impacts. You're moving in the right direction. And this is actually easy. This isn't difficult, but you can't build the wrong project. It's a real interesting policy perspective on this. So, what is Sonoma County doing? It's really getting into this. We're seeing the water agency talking with the transit authority about energy. They're talking about climate emissions. They're talking with the cities, and the cities themselves are talking about how do we actually benefit from the energy industry. Cities are, you know, missing out on the most stable source of income in the history of the United States that basically has been growing at 5 to 6% every year for the last 70 years. Cities don't have a crack at that income, and that income comes in every day, whether the economy is doing well or whether it's doing badly. It's not mercurial like the construction industry. Cities could benefit from some income like that right now. So community power gets interesting. We're also seeing conversations shifting. So we're not just talking about expanding capacity in a water district. We're talking about thinking of, you know, we have a problem. If the fastest growing element of water use in a county is leaks, it's not new development. That's an opportunity. If 80% of the amount of flow into a sewage treatment plant in the rainy season is from rain, that's an opportunity. And we've lost the slide. That's all right. So all of these kinds of opportunities are coming around in Sonoma County, and we're seeing people talking together in new ways. And that's what gets me really excited, is figuring out what comes next there. Thank you.